Morning. Seeing that it is 11 o'clock on the dot, I'm going to go ahead and get started. So my name is Manuel Talavera. I go by Manny. I'm a professional development specialist with the Illinois Student Assistance Commission, and this webinar is on the state of education in Illinois. I do have a few housekeeping items before I go over the content of this presentation. This session is being recorded, and we will upload this on our website as soon as we can. Okay. And we have Q&A available if you have any questions throughout any of the content. We're going to be going over a lot of data. We use a platform called WebEx, and if you're unfamiliar, you can zoom in and out of any of the content to see closer as to which slides and information I'm talking about, and it's not going to impact anybody else's views. We also are offering continuing education and professional development hours from this webinar, so we will have more information towards the end of this webinar as to how you can access our link, so we can get you those within a few days from completing. So for those who are unfamiliar about ISAC, we're the Illinois Student Assistance Commission. Our mission is to provide Illinois students with information and assistance to help make education beyond high school accessible and affordable. We also administer scholarships and grants to students across the state of Illinois. We provide professional development offerings on navigating the financial aid process and really other professional development opportunities such as these monthly webinars that we put out. A lot of us know us from the agency that administers the MAP grant and the agency that administers the ISAC core. Now, in terms of what we're going to talk about today, some of you have even seen this presentation in some of the conferences that we attend, but this presentation will go over the 60 by 25 goal as to what that means and how that impacts our work, the impact of COVID in education. I know it's been a few years out, but recently in high school, this past class size, this past recent high school graduation class was the last class in high school that was impacted by COVID-19. So even it's still lasting impact. And we have basic needs for college students that we'll go over, as well as where Illinois college students going, or high school students going, as well as funding in higher education here in Illinois. So we'll talk about the goal. So a lot of this is what guides our work. And the goal here started based off a report from the Lumina Foundation that found in Illinois specifically, and I am 100% certain that it's probably the same in other states, 8 out of 10 employers say they need employees with some post-secondary education. That's anything after high school, right? And this goal was set in 2009 based off this report that came out in 2008, which this goal was aimed to increase the percentage of adults with a college and career credential beyond high school to 60% by 2025. And since 2009, the Illinois attainment rate has increased by more than 50% since 2009. And the one thing I want to point out too is in Illinois, we sit above the national average, right? Illinois oftentimes sits above in FAFSA completion data, as FAFSA completion rate data, as well as college attainment data, which then becomes an advantage for employers who are looking to settle in states. They often look at Illinois. And other thing I want to point out is looking at this data, we're at 61.8% if we include short-term credential, and if we don't include short-term credentials, we're at 53.8%. And I'll have some more information as to what a short-term credential is. So looking at the same report by the Lumina Foundation, which is also published by Advance Illinois, is where we got this data. This looks at the ages from 25 to 34, and we looked at the current attainment rate for college is 61.8%. So let's look at the full attainment rate. We have 30% that has a bachelor's degree, which is the highest. We have for graduate or professional degree 14.8%. Then someone with an associate's degree, it's 8.9%, certificate 4.7%, a certification 3.3%. This also includes industry recognized credentials. And so for those who don't know the difference between a certificate and a certification, so a certificate is something you can get like at a community college or maybe a trade school. And oftentimes certification, you need to work with a type of organization that offers an examination of some sort that tests your knowledge within certain industry standards. So oftentimes someone needs to get a degree and then you need to pass a certification. Think about your nurses, doctors, lawyers, counselors, you name it. There are many individuals that, many professions that require, such as like an occupational license or for you to pass some sort of certificate. And just as reference, if you don't have any audio, you can switch. Oftentimes, if you are connected to like a dual screen or something of that nature, that can impact your audio. So if you hover your cursor over the mute button, you will see an option to switch audio, where you can dial in or WebEx can call you directly, and it'll switch that audio. Other thing that I would point out here, the high school graduate class is 21.1%. That one is quite high. And then the percentage of individuals who have a college degree but no credential is at 11.7%. So I often, when looking at this, looking at the individuals who went to college but didn't finish credential, what's going on? Why didn't they finish? Now, looking at the degree attainment by age, race, and ethnicity, looking at the same population group, 25 to 34, looking about these young professionals, the total population in Illinois is 1.69 million, of which the overall attainment range we talked about, looking specifically at the 53.8%, meaning these are the individuals that don't have the short-term credentials. So someone with at least a certificate, right, or associate's degree. So the Asian Pacific Islander population attainment rate is 83.8%. The white population, 61.6%. The Hispanic population is 37%. Black population is 31.1%. And the Native American population is 19.5%. So you can see that distribution is there. Now, I do want to talk a little bit about COVID-19 in education. And really, when we start looking into the data trends, we'll kind of see some big gaps, and we'll continue to talk about it throughout that data, because this does have some lasting impacts, even though most of the data and high school graduation rates and so forth has either been not really impacted or bounced back, or we've seen reports about attendance data bouncing back and so forth. There's still a lasting impact that I'll highlight. So with the pandemic, the shutdown caused a multitude of challenges and really exposed a lot of the vulnerabilities within our education system. Maybe things that we've known about but could ignore, and now we weren't able to ignore anymore, such as access to the internet, right? We've seen enrollment drop in K through 12 schools. We've seen the population decline, specifically in Illinois and in Chicagoland area where I'm located, drop more exponentially, where families are moving to other states such as Texas and Florida. We've also seen enrollment declines from Latino and Black students, especially students from lower income households, whether that's in K through 12. Right, we've seen that in community college enrollment declines, though we are seeing some surges. We have also seen some staff shortages. There is a terminology that was coined, I believe, by an author from the New York Times. I have to columnist by the New York Times, but they refer to the Great Resignation as individuals who resign from their job, right? And we know that with COVID, wherever we were, I know I was a working professional at that time. The work didn't stop, and it only seemed to increase, right? Because now we're all home, right? Or those who at least were fortunate enough to work from home. Now with high school trends, high school graduation rates in Illinois haven't been impacted, which is a good thing. And you can see this data in the student report card that gets published by the Illinois State Board of Education every year. We've seen some strong policies that kept the racial gaps in high school graduation rates. They didn't widen, so that's good. We've seen Illinois, the rate is 88%, which comes at decades long of policies addressing these inequities in high school graduation rates. Though we did see the grade on track rates fall for Black students 6.8% and Latino students at 8.6%. And this setback can undo some of the progress in decades of work, but we haven't seen any of the graduation rates really impacted too much. And those on track are someone failing a core class like English or science or math, and that significantly can hold them back. The data shows that can hold them back. in terms of being college ready after high school. So it's looking college enrollment, K through college enrollment. And this is looking specifically at Illinois public schools. So I'm going to zoom in for my sake, but we can kind of see some trends. And I know that looking at a lot of this data, you'll see the dates are far back, and it's really hard to get up-to-date data. It takes time for individuals, especially from these state agencies, to review, report that data, and for nonprofit organizations such as Advance Illinois to look and process and make sense of that data. So that does take time, right? So some of the data you'll see is 2021, 2022. So I really try my best to look and do a scope of all the data that is present that can kind of make sense to really paint a broad picture. But ultimately, it's not going to be up to date because it's difficult to get on the scene, on the spot data, right? I know we always strive to get the most complete data, but I'm trying to put a more holistic approach to this. So looking into the different grade levels, kindergarten, elementary, middle school, and high school, you can kind of see from 2017 all the way to 2021 as that enrollment's declining across the board, right? And if you look at the population trends for white, black, Latino, and Asian students, same applies, right? With the exception, and then looking and not exception, but looking at even with the IEP students or students who are low income background, you can kind of see that um, so there's declines across the board, whether it's urban, suburban, or rural, or individuals like to coin micro-urban for small city centers and more urban area, more rural areas, is that trends are not favorable, right? And so looking at that, even the preliminary data from 2022, you can see that information is lower. So let's continue to pay attention to that. And we can see some exacerbation with that data in 2019, 2020 because of COVID-19. I know we see the middle grades kind of stagnant there, but we see a decline in high school and elementary school, like a slight decline, but biggest decline being in elementary school. Now, looking at the race over time, I think it's important to look at this data chart from the Illinois Board of Higher Education, specifically on outmigration. We're going to see a lot of data from this specific report because I think they put in a lot of good information out, especially because they track like where are Illinois students going, right? We want our students to stay in Illinois, to graduate from an Illinois school, to stay and work in Illinois, stay closer to family, and ultimately, provide and be contributors to the tax infrastructure to the system in Illinois. But looking at these trends, we can see the blue highlights the white student population, the orange highlights Latino student population, and the blue is Native American population. The yellow is the Asian American population, and the African American population, I'm sorry, is the blue. There's a dark blue, but it's not shown on here since it's not too big of a population. But that blue that we see on screen, that is for the African American population. But looking in here, you can see the white population as a distribution of race in public schools by high school graduates decline from almost 50% to 51%. And then looking at the Latino population, we've seen that increase from almost 23% to now getting under 26%. But we've also seen the African American population decline from almost 16, 17% to 14%. And that is even more true in like Chicago public schools or schools within the Chicagoland area as well. Now, it's also important to know that Illinois is graduating less high school students overall, right? Not just certain demographic groups, but overall in general. So looking at this chart, look right now we're at least when this data was published, it was in 20 looking in 2022. But in 2021, we had 133,500, and it's going to stay pretty relatively flat up until we start getting into 2024, 2026. We'll start seeing that dip. Now it's going to project and go even lower, where if we get all the way to 2035, which is just 11 years from now, right? We're talking over 20 something thousand less students. And when I share a report from the Urban Institute, right, they're reporting that since 2009, right, enrollment has declined significantly at 2-year and 4-year institutions, right? And if we have 20,000 less students that are graduating, we have 20,000 less students that are filling out the FAFSA, 20,000 less students that are using the MAP or Pell Grant. And so that impacts, think about the long-lasting impacts that does to the employment system here, the funding mechanisms to four-year colleges, universities, even at the high school, right? And also the resources that institutions receive, public institutions receive from the state that look into that. Now, looking into two-year enrollment data, well, we'll see, it's a bit looking in 2020, but we can see those trends and they've dipped significantly, especially that 2020. That's when this is that really where we're highlighting the COVID-19 exacerbation. Really, at the two-year public institutions, it really took a huge hit. You can see losing 14,000, almost 14,000 Latino students, 5,000 Black students, and almost 15,000 white students. So huge drops. However, we're reporting a bounce back, right? So looking at this report from Illinois Community College Board from 2023, I'm really curious to see what the 2024 data reports out. But we've seen those big dips. Look at that dip from 2019 to 2020, almost 14% negative drop, right? They were dropping maybe 4%, and we saw in 2021 a little bit of resurgence, 2022, and we're seeing a positive. But the one thing I want to point out here is that this information also includes students who are enrolled in dual credit, right? So if you have students in your high school that are also earning a college, an associate's degree while they're in, or they're just earning college credit, right? They're counted in this factor, right? So something to keep in mind. Now looking at four-year institutions, I do apologize, the data does look kind of tiny, but you can, zoom in. So let's look at this data, and we can see again those drops, right? Now it didn't drop so much for Black students. That's about 50 students. For Latino students, we saw an increase, right? Which is something to kind of highlight. We saw an increase with the Asian student population as well. We saw a decrease with the white student population. And we can kind of see a little bit of stagnation between rural, suburban, and urban. And this is for public institutions. So overall, it was just a slight decrease, less than 1,000. But important to kind of see where students going and how did COVID kind of impact that. Now, looking more current, we can kind of see the Illinois Public University headcount. Unfortunately, I don't have it broken down by race. It was difficult to obtain, but this kind of highlights overall the headcount. We can see that looking at the fall of 2018, 2019, it was at 133,000, and now we're at 126,927. And so this number, especially if we go on and to think about, if we continue to graduate less and less students, there's going to be less and less students enrolling in two-year and four-year institutions, right? And so it's important to kind of highlight. And we have the distribution between those who are an undergrad and those who are graduates, and they have the total amounts to the right and a smaller amount. Like for example, for the 23-24, it's 182,657. We can see that while it's increasing from the year prior, overall, we're expecting to continue to see declines again, because if you have less and less students that are graduating, it's going to impact that. So looking into the class of 2021, so where are students immediately going? So these are Illinois high school students in public schools. Where are they going immediately after graduation? And we know not every student goes to one of these options after high school, right? For some students take a gap year, they may take other options. But looking at this data, we can see that in terms of the population, we have the red, which signifies a two-year immediate enrollment, and the four-year institution immediate enrollment is in blue. So we can see for a white student population, it's 82%. So 82% of students from the class of 2020 are immediately enrolling in either two-year option, which is at 18.4%, but the majority being a four-year degree, right? 63.8%. I'm sorry, that was the Asian population. The white population is 65.5%, with 22.8% immediately going to a two-year degree, and 42.6% going to a four-year degree. So we can kind of see all of those trends to really highlight when getting into the Latino population, where we can see that it's almost equally distributed between students going to a two-year degree and a four-year degree. I'm not saying that it's good or bad, but something to highlight, especially with our practices. If you are working in the high school field, are you inadvertently just sending Latino students to a two-year degree, right? So really take a more equitable lens when working with students to ensure that every student who you think or who every student who feels that they can succeed in a foreign institution is given that opportunity to apply to schools, etc. That we're not channeling students into one option over the other based upon that. But it's important to kind of see this data. Again, this is from the Illinois Board of Higher Education. And it's, again, this doesn't highlight students who take a gap year or waiting a little bit longer because we know that that can um, impact already. So looking into the undocumented students here in Illinois, um, nearly, and this is, and we can only look at just Chicago in terms of where they've gone since Chicago is difficult to assess. But since of August 2022, there nearly 48,000 migrants or recent arrivals have arrived in Chicago last summer. And while not all of those migrants, thinking about college, enrollment, right? The one thing to point out that Illinois is ranked number 5 with the number of undocumented students in higher education. In terms of the immigrant influence in state, um, Illinois is ranked top 5, oftentimes top 3 behind New York, California, Texas, Florida. So it's often in that top 5 space. So we're 20,151 undocumented students in Illinois, of which 2,000 graduate high school every year. And it's estimated that only about 1 in 10 of undocumented students enroll in college upon graduating high school. And so one thing to note too with the recent arrivals, you have many students who could even be applying for asylum, right? Well, often referred to as asylum seekers, right? When it comes to eligibility for federal student aid, it's based off the student's eligibility status, not of their parents. So you can have students that could be eligible for state aid, but not eligible for federal student aid, or you can have recent arrivals who came in, a year ago who won't be eligible for anything, right? That can happen. But they could be eligible for institutional aid or other scholarships and opportunities that are specified as such. So I want to highlight some key Illinois legislation, right, in terms of supporting undocumented students. So we have Public Act 93 hyphen 007 in 2003, which granted in-state tuition to qualifying undocumented immigrants at 2-year and 4-year public institutions. We have the DREAM Act of 2011, which provides access to 529 college saving plans and private Illinois Dream Fund scholarships. We also have the ability, we have the professional licensure in 2019, which allows individuals to utilize an ITIN, which is an individual taxpayer identification number, which allows them to apply for professional license required for their career. So if for those individuals who do not have a social, allows them to use an ITIN in lieu of a social security number and not be discriminated against for not having a social. You have the RISE Act in 2019. So more recently, provided access, which provides access to state financial aid programs to qualifying undocumented immigrants, uses the criteria in Public Act 93-007 that was passed in 2003 that determines which of those students are qualifying undocumented students. Also created the alternative application, Illinois alternative application for Illinois financial aid. And then we have House Bill 3438, which created the undocumented student liaison, which I have another slide where I talk a little bit about this. But it places a liaison at each 2-year and 4-year public institution to help undocumented students navigate degree completion. The goal is to get them to and through college. And then more recently, not to be a plug for the scratch off, but to highlight that effective this year in January, the Illinois Lottery created a new scratch off game, in which the earnings from that game will benefit the Illinois Dream Fund Commission to help provide scholarships and support to undocumented students. So rather than put a plug on the Illinois Dream scratch off game, I wanted to highlight the nonprofit organization, the Illinois Dream Fund Commission, which if you would like to donate or help support students, that is the great place to go and check out. So I want to also highlight very quickly a report from the Urban Institute that really was looking into the basic need for college students. And in this report, Just want to highlight too that Illinois has 231 colleges and universities. There's 12 public four-year institutions, right? And there are 48 community colleges, right? And among those Illinois graduates in that report, looking at a survey they put on 2022, that 24% of those students experienced low or very low food security in the previous 30 days. 7% were homeless in the previous 30 days. 16% had dependent children, as well as 50% had unmet aid after financial aid was received. And oftentimes, like we're working with students, even if they were a zero or even a negative student aid index, similarly, when it was the expected family contribution rate of seen prior years, that just because you demonstrate financial need does not mean that you will receive financial aid. Or the full financial aid in which you could be eligible for. Now, if they're eligible for MAP and Pell, they will always receive that. But in terms of institutional aid or other aid that is used to meet that gap, right, between what the college costs and what the family can afford. Oftentimes we still see that gap. I know for me, that gap was not counting loans or anything like that, and I know it's still financial aid. I know for me it was still $10,000, right? And I was a commuter student. Now, some opportunities, and this report highlighted, in case some of you who do know or don't know, there are designated staff at each public institution now. Each have different responsibilities and often communicate with each other. First, I want to highlight, and they often came out around the same time, 2022, 2023, but we have benefits navigators. So they're responsible for helping students determine eligibility, help the students determine eligibility for public benefits or services, not just at the campus, but also maybe SNAP benefits or other initiatives. Maybe if they have children, they help with daycare, connecting them to those resources. Then we have house liaisons, so they are responsible for connecting students experiencing homelessness and youth in care, so foster care students, pardon me, to on and off campus resources, um, and as well as undocumented student liaison, which we just talked about. They're responsible for providing academic and financial assistance to undocumented students and students from mixed status families. So really in tune of any state policy, federal policies, institutional policies too as well. So I tell students all the time that look into the institutions to see who these navigators are or liaisons are and connect with them. Or you as professionals, right? Connect with these individuals, ICCB, IBHE, not IBHE and ISB, they put out a list of these individuals so you can have their contact information and can already reach out to see who these individuals are. And then I want to kind of look at some data to see where students are going. I know I said kind of. That's. I was just telling my colleagues this is my filler word. We are going to look at data. We're not kind of going to look at it. We are going to look at it. So, Illinois students are unfortunately there's a migration crisis that's been plaguing Illinois since at least 2002, and it's continuing to hurt Illinois. So we have to think about what does this mean for their financial aid package when they go out of state? Are they getting better packages? Um, and what will this mean for their workforce? If we have a student that leaves Illinois, are they going to come back? Are they going to work here? Right. So in 2002, we had 19,621 Illinois students enrolled as freshmen at 996 out of state four-year colleges and universities, which they could be here. Right. In 2006, that increased to almost 22,000. And in 2012, it went up to 28,000. And in 2016, now it's at 31,000. And it seems like it's not stopping. It's almost doubled from that time period, right? I've gone to several schools where high schools and assisted them where it was like the thing to just apply to an out-of-state school. So let's look at this chart from IBHE that looks at a few things. And I want to highlight them. The baby blue is out migration. So the students leaving the state. The green is, well, we also take students in, students who want to study at our institutions, right? And we have world-renowned tier one research institutions, UIC, U of I, flagship institutions, NIU, you name it, right? The list can go on and on. Now the net looks at what the difference between the two is. And if you notice, we've been in the negative. The best time we've gotten close to each other was in 2008, 2008, 9 area where the net was just under 3,000 students lost compared to students that came in. But if we look at recently, we've had 33,543 students leave the state and only 14,994 students came into the state, effective losing on 18,549 students, right? So we have to again think about those implications, not just, okay, well, where are they going? Right? They're leaving to college elsewhere. So we know they're pursuing a post-secondary credential, but we have to think about too the impact that it has on our current institutions, right? Because we've certainly seen we're seeing the declining enrollment at NIU, at Western, at Eastern, right? And a lot of institutions who are perhaps doing better than others, right? That out migration is not having an equal impact on our public institutions, and it's important to highlight which ones that are not. Um, Now, let's look at a few things. These charts that I put together from the data from IBHE to really highlight, okay, oops, where are they going? I meant to zoom in for my sake. So majority is going to University of Iowa. And then we have second place, University of Missouri, University of Indiana, right? Indiana University in Bloomington, their flagship school, Purdue University, again, their main campus in West Lafayette. So we're seeing some similarities in most of these are Big Ten schools, right? So very similar to, U of I, UIUC. Now, if we go by destination states, 12.4%, most of them are going to Indiana at 3,144. Then we have Wisconsin, Iowa, Missouri, Michigan, Ohio. Those are all Midwestern states. So students are not like, oh, I want to go because I want to go to warm weather. I'm going to Florida. Florida's barely on this list, right? Or even Arizona, right? They're staying in Midwest, right? So they're staying pretty local. So it's important for policymakers to look at that and think like, well, what's something that is different between the landscape of Illinois for college students compared to Indiana, Wisconsin, Iowa? If it is just a financial aid package, what can we do for funding to help meet that gap for students, right? Because we want to keep that talent, keep those students here. Um, and this brings us to our last piece, which is funding in higher education. Then we get into too as well how students are paying for their college. So let's look at Illinois appropriations for public universities. And what I want to highlight here is that this is adjusted for inflation. Okay. Now, the report that that actually partnerships for college completion, they put out this report, and what they're highlighting here is if we adjust for inflation, Illinois is significantly underfunding their institutions and have been historically. Um, and you're seeing this trending going down, down, down. And of course, we had record inflation for other things as well that's impacting. So even now that the state is providing record funding to institutions and in higher education, the amount, if we adjust for inflation, is still below at least $1 to $2 billion for the total system. I'm talking about community colleges, four-year institutions, MAP grants, you name it, all of it. And you'll see this huge dip in fiscal year 2016, 2017. And for those who are around professionally or were a student at the time, you can recall the budget impasse. So that's why there was this huge dip, right? Because the state didn't pass a budget, certain programs weren't funded for some time, which institutions are still feeling that impact of, right? Because you have some institutions that were fronting money, borrowing money to help offset that gap. Otherwise, they would have lost a lot of students. So looking at the current fiscal year, and I'm only doing sort of a quick highlight rather than just doing a full line item appropriation review. There's $30.6 million more for public institutions, which is a 2% increase from last year. MAP grant also got a $10 million increase, but the maximum award right now is still 8,400. And so we're pretty much able to provide a MAP grant to every applicant who's eligible for it. So that's a good thing. We did have a MAP suspense date recently, and that was the first suspense date in a few fiscal years. And for those who are unfamiliar with suspense dates, we still encourage students to apply for the MAP grant. And the reason why is MAP grants can change. You can have students who decide to go out of state or in state. But MAP is funded by appropriation, so we tell students apply for the MAP ASAP via the FAFSA, or if you're not eligible for the alternative application, because funding is limited, right? You want to make sure you get that money. The Early Childhood Access Consortium for Equity Scholarship, also known as ECACE, is now state funded. It used to be federally funded, so now it's state funded, which means that the amount is going to be significantly less. I think for the 3 years that ECACE was federally funded, it received funding for over 150, $170 million, but now we're appropriating up $5 million for fiscal year 25. We have MTI received stagnant funding at 8 million, and we have new funding for human resources professional loan repayment program at 5.25 million, as well as reimbursements for the IBG and the Illinois National Guard, the ING grants as well. So let's kind of look at to see how our students paying for college. This is a report from Sally Mae, which I think it's really neat. Also curious, right? Because Sally Mae is a proprietary organization. They provide private student loans for students. But what they wanted to highlight to see how are students paying for college, and they put out the survey every year. And so this is last year's data. And if we look at how a typical family on the left side pays for college versus how typically family, this is looking at the average amount versus the source as a percentage, right? But it's looking at the same thing, but just as a percentage source. We can see that for most students, the majority of the money is coming from the parent income, which is at 40% is the greatest share. I know, like in the FAFSA, we tell students, like students are primarily responsible for paying for the cost of college. But let's look, that's not what this is saying. This is saying, well, we need parent income, right? And that's what it looks at. That's why parent information is required if you're a dependent student, right? But if we say students are responsible for paying that back, or if they take student loans, then of course, but parents can also take out plus ones and do all this stuff. So it does kind of um, hurt that idea a little bit. With scholarships and grants, that is 30%. And if students, some relatives are generous, 2%, a couple $100, right? So maybe do GoFundMe with your family. I've attended several, and I think this is a great idea, but I've attended several family birthday parties for their younger kids, and they're all, instead of like telling, hey, come with presents, instead of saying these are the size of our kids for clothes or toys or whatever, they're saying here is a link to our Bright Star 529 plan, contribute here. Right? I think that's an awesome idea. Because we know the potential growth with that, and the cost of college is going up. Then looking at state financial aid, so it's looking at in terms of the amount of students that use our programs. And so it's kind of highlighting, especially this is specifically looking at the monetary award program as well. So seeing some declining trends there. And then for MAP recipients, um, we see that 2/3 of MAP recipients are women, 64% compared to 36%. And the majority are from the Chicago and Collier counties recipients, 75% compared to 25% for the rest of the state. And that matches the population distribution. Illinois has roughly 12 million people, and 9 million live in the Chicago metropolitan area. The majority of MAP recipients attend a public university or public community college, so 72%. So they are keeping those dollars in those public institutions. And more than half of those recipients have no resources for college. So looking at, and this one we're still calculating, I'm curious to see what the data would be for fiscal year 24 when we look at SAI data. But 54% of these students have an EFC at zero, right, of MAP recipients. And if you look at those from low income households, a MAP recipient median household income is $30,708 on average. And it's very close to the poverty guideline level for a family of four at 26,200. We'll also see that MAP recipients come from larger size households, 3.4 for an average MAP recipient versus 2.5 for the Illinois average household. And then I want to highlight the Illinois FAFSA completion date, the rate. This is looking as of September 6th of 2024. Our FAFSA completion rate is 59.3% for the high school class of 2024. This does include a well, actually a little bit over 10%, a 10.3% change, so negative 10% change in rates compared to last year. But Illinois is not alone, and even then, Illinois is still above national average, right? The national average is 51.7%. Now we're above that at 59.3%. The one thing I want to take note of is that several of these that look at state completion rate, this is an NCAN FAFSA tracker. And so looking at this data, Illinois has historically been a top 10 state in FAFSA completion and often looked at as a leader in financial aid assistance and planning and especially the help of the ISAC Corps and the work that you all do in the field. Puerto Rico isn't a state. Washington, D.C. is not a state. So, well, we've recently been in the top 5 category, but right now we're in 7th place and close, right? Especially Washington, D.C. only a couple percentage points behind. But we have been making serious strides in the last couple of months and ensuring that students that have already graduated are continuing to receive some form of support throughout the summer and start of the school year as well. So that does it for pretty much the content of this presentation. I also want to highlight our ISAC Connect portal. So if you have any questions and you want to reach out to us, right, use this as your direct line to the professional development team. So if you have any questions about the work that you do or anything, ISAC related, reach out to us. Our number is 847-250-2384. There's immediate enrollment, and we will also communicate information about any updates to ISAC and federal student aid programs as well. For 2024 College Access Symposium, so you can join us at one of the 4 locations this year, at Southern Illinois University in Carbondale, and Lincoln Land College as well, on October 29th. We'll also be in Moraine Valley on November 6th, and November 8th we'll be at Sauk Valley. And so the College Access Symposium we're combining our work that we do with FAFSA completion data and work that we do in PACE to put one symposium together. And we'd love to, as a state agency, try to reach all of the population and the demographics as we can. So join us on tour, right? We're going to be all throughout the state, right? To learn about how high schools and organizations are supporting students to be ready post high school, right? College and career ready. We also want to highlight our FAFSA communication toolkit. So if you want to help get the word out on FAFSA completion and any tools that we have available, we have some resources available at no cost. You can go to our website, isac.org/counselors. We can see our toolkit and other resources that we have available for you as well. You can also, I don't think you, Megan, she shared the link for our College Access Symposium registrations up. Cost to attend the symposium is $25. So we have our First Gen Scholars Network. Some of you may have joined our First Gen Symposium last year, but what this network entails, it provides an extra resource for students who are first in their family to go to college. We connect them with the First Gen mentor and highlight other organizations and campuses, events that are happening for students who are First Gen and may need some additional support. And then for those who are looking for CE and PD hours, we have our evaluation. Thank you, Megan, for sharing our evaluation. It's up in the chat. You may have to open up that chat window, copy and paste. We do ask that you submit this evaluation by Monday, 2024. If you are requesting PD hours, we need your EIN. Can't process these if you don't send your EIN. Evaluation is up in the chat. I will keep this open just for a few seconds to make sure everyone has that information that they have that link to access the survey. Okay, and that does it. There's a contact information, ISAC.outreach training at illinois.gov. If you have any questions, comments, concerns, reach out to us. And we also want to highlight our e-messaging system. It's isac.org/e-messaging. This is a great tool to receive the latest updates and news happening at ISAC. Not just the training offerings that we do, such as financial aid certification trainings, but other webinars and other initiatives that we are posting and talking about at ISAC. So that does it for the content of our presentation. Thank you all for joining us. We'll keep this presentation open for a bit longer in case anyone has any questions. But until then, we'll see you guys next time. Thank you.